and then we'll proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm bringing you live, and there are a lot more people in attendance than are on your list. So.
Okay. And then we'll proceed.
And you are live, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Carla. Welcome, everybody, to Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources. I will call this meeting to order, and if Barb, you would please call roll.
Representative Banks.
Here.
Representative Haroldson.
Here.
Representative Hunt.
Here.
Representative Jennings.
Yes, ma'am.
Representative Knapp.
Here.
Vice Chair Newsom.
Here.
Representative Sweeney.
Here.
Representative Winter.
Here.
Chairwoman Flitner.
Here. Thank you, Barb, and thank everybody who's in attendance. And if it gets loud back there, Representative Clifford. Oh, I guess Barb's going to go ahead and close the door. Okay. All right, committee, welcome everybody. And we have two bills before us today, Senate File 88, and then after that, House Bill 220. So we will begin with Senate File 88, and we welcome Senator Koss to the table. Welcome, sir. Have a seat, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Today I bring before you Senate File 88, ownership of fossils and artifacts. What this tries to do is identify, especially whenever there's a split estate, who the artifacts actually belong to. If we go through the bill quickly, it's not very long, so it won't take us long to get through that. And then we'll answer questions, starting with page 1, line 1. And I'm using the engrossed copy because that's the one I'm supposed to bring to you. An act relating to property and conveyances specifying ownership of fossils, artifacts, and non-fossilized animal remains discovered in split estates and providing for an effective date. And what I'd like to say before I start on the rest of it is there was a case that came up a few years ago, and that's what prompted this, because at the time currently we don't have anything on the records. And so they had to use the Montana information as they were trying to make a decision on the particular case. And I can provide that case for you if you need. So moving along, on page 1, line 8, it says Wyoming Statute 34-1-154 is created to read ownership of fossils and artifacts. The ownership of any fossil, artifact, or non-fossilized animal remains discovered in the strata below the surface lands and water of the state is vested in the owner of the surface estate, unless otherwise governed by Wyoming Statute 74106. 74106 is archaeological human burial sites, and this is for protection of those particular sites around the state. Going on page 2 to line 4, when used in any instrument, the term minerals does not include fossils, artifacts, or non-fossilized animal remains. And down below there, we have on line 8, as used in this section, 10, line 10, I, fossils means any fossilized remains, traces or imprints of organisms preserved in or on the Earth's crust that are of paleontological interest and that provide information about the history of life on Earth, but does not include coal, oil, gas, or other hydrocarbons. Line 17, Romanet 2I, artifact means any material remains of the past human life or human activities that are of archaeological interest. And down below that, we have section 2 on line 21. This act shall apply to any existing or future transfers of ownership of the strata below the surface lands and waters of the state. This act on page 3 is effective July 1st of 2021. And so all this really is doing is trying to identify those artifacts. And fossils, really, it's for fossils more than anything else. I had no idea of the value of some of these fossils, and there's definitely an extremely large amount of value to them. We're not talking thousands or even hundreds. Some of them can go into the millions. So it's definitely something that certain landowners are going to want to be able to take interest in. With that, I would entertain any questions anybody may have.
Thank you, Senator Cost. Committee questions for Senator Cost? Representative Jennings?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Senator Cost, could you give us a little more detail as to what brought this? I mean, because I would think that surface landowners would typically be thought of as the owners of that. So, and is that not currently the situation?
Senator Cost?
Well, we'll hear from somebody that this case actually came from that will be able to testify on that and probably answer it much better than I can. The bottom line is it was contested, and therefore in the split estate, it was determined the owner of the land was the one that had that. So to say that, you know how mineral rights split off and split off and split off, when you start talking about large valuable fossils, there's also the instance where others might take an active interest in that and therefore say, well, I want a part of this. I can't imagine anybody wanting to buy land understanding that somebody else is going to keep part of the fossil rights or whatever. But that being said, there are stranger things that have happened in our world, so I certainly won't go any further on that. But that's the best answer I can add at this time. One of the people, Mr. John Ed Anderson, will be testifying. He was the reason he contacted me about this because we didn't have one and Montana did. So I would ask that question to him as well.
Representative Haroldson and then Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Senator Cost, just to clarify, and I'm just going to throw three things out. So we'll say fossilized artifacts from, let's say, a dinosaur, artifacts being an arrowhead, and then non-fossilized animal remains, that 400-inch bull elk that got caught in the landslide. Would that cover what we're talking about here, basically, or things in those categories in nature?
Senator Cost.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And Representative Haroldson. Yes, it would. Obviously, smaller artifacts such as the small scale fossils and that type, monetarily wise, are minimal at best.
Yeah.
But the larger and more expensive is more what this is focused on, but it certainly would entail that, yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So, Senator, does this go, does it help to clarify also on state sections, state-owned sections, or to actually more private property rights?
Senator Cost.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And Representative Sweeney, this is really more for the private lands. State lands are under different restrictions and different rules, and so it'll be covered in a different way.
And just for your reference to Representative Sweeney, there's a notation within the bill itself on page 2. It references Wyoming statute 74106, and that would cover anything on state lands. But we'll have the state archaeologists will also be here to answer any questions you might have. Committee, further questions? Senator Cost, for the sake of time, because I know you have another bill to also have in front of another committee, why don't you just stay there? And I see we have Representative Clifford in the room and also Representative Blackburn, if he's here to testify. But Representative Clifford, would you like to testify to this bill? And you can just stay there and she can sit there on the end.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. I am just here to voice some concerns from the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes. And your good chairman did reference the statute on that second page there that had to deal with human remains in regards to state lands. Both tribes have concerns in the bill with the section of the artifacts. And the potential for allowing of items of cultural patrimony, sacred objects, cultural materials to slip through the cracks with surface owners and unwanted exploitation of artifacts for sale. I know this is specific to private lands, but overall, as artifacts are concerned on a whole, there is some concerns there in the bill. And so I just kind of wanted to express that. And did reach out from our Tribal Historic Preservation Office, particularly the Northern Arapaho tribe that had concerns with this bill. So I'll just stand for any questions if
Okay.
anybody has any.
Questions for Representative Clifford? Yes, Vice Chairman Newsom.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Clifford, is there a way to amend this that would give the tribes more comfort in the enactment of this potential statute?
Madam Chairman, Representative Newsom, sure. We're willing to have a discussion and see if amendments will appease the tribe's concerns, both tribes actually, particularly.
Okay. Further questions, committee? Okay, and you'll be here in case we haven't. Okay, and Representative Blackburn, are you here to testify to this? Okay, thank you. Very good. Well, I believe I did reach out to the state archaeologist, and if he is here, if he could jump into the meeting, that is Spencer Pelton. I can't read the names. Is it okay? So Carla, if you could let Mr. Pelton into the meeting, please.
Madam Chairman, I do not see Mr. Pelton
He's clear
here.
at clear at the bottom of your list, Carla.
Oh, there. Thank you. Sorry. Here he comes.
It's hard to get around, snow on the ice, slow getting to the meeting. That, and in fact, I just asked him to come to the meeting about 5. There he is, yes, in his car.
Pulled over on the side of the road here.
Please do, we don't want to wreck. Bad enough out there.
Yeah.
Welcome, Mr. Pelton. We appreciate you obviously modifying your noon hour to join us at the meeting today. And I just want to apologize to you for providing you with such short notice. But thank you for being here.
That's quite all right. Happy to do it.
I don't know if you've heard any of the testimony previously, or what do we need to do to get you up to speed? Or if you've heard everything, if you could just weigh in on it, we'd appreciate it.
I heard about the last 10 minutes of it. I gave this bill a once over and asked for the section about the human remains and associated grave items to be included in that, so there was no confusion there that those items should be exempt from this bill, even on private lands. I didn't see an immediate issue with it. I think that artifact collecting is a pretty long-standing pastime in Wyoming amongst private landowners. Oftentimes, those folks are generous enough to share what they found with my office and with others in the state, which has oftentimes been a great source of collaboration. I think that this clears up an issue that could come up from time to time, but hopefully it doesn't come up too often. Don't have a whole lot more to say about it than that.
So, Mr. Pelton, the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes have brought their concern that, and the inclusion of on page 2, Romanet to the language that does bring in artifact, and we just want to alleviate their concerns. We don't know if it's necessary to amend that out of the bill, and if we do amend artifact out of the bill, is there concerns with that? If we leave it in, any of your, just if you could speak to that, please.
Madam Chair, I fully appreciate their concerns, and I really think that they should speak for themselves on that issue. Some of these items have value to the tribes in Wyoming that go far and beyond the value that we have for the items as archaeologists, as purely scientific objects of study. So I don't feel like that I can necessarily speak for them on this issue. I think scenarios could certainly come up where there'd be some items of cultural patrimony that the tribes would certainly have an interest in off of private lands that go beyond your typical artifact, your typical arrowheads or bones or pieces of chipstone. I don't feel like it's my role to speak on those specific items of significance for the tribes, but as far as from a purely archaeological perspective, for items that have scientific value or value for museum displays, things like that, I'm comfortable with the language of the bill from that perspective.
Okay, thank you. Committee questions? Yes, Vice Chairman Newsom.
If there's a artifact on a property owner's land and it's determined not his, then whose is it? So if I find an arrowhead on my property and it's considered to be without this bill, who owns it? Do I own it? Does the state own it? At this point, who owns it without this bill? And then with this bill, I assume that I would own it.
Mr. Pelton?
Madam Chair, it's my understanding that as of right now, those artifacts do belong to the landowner, and it's simply this issue of split estates where there's the mineral rights are owned separately from the surface property that it might come into question. The scenario that came to mind in reading this was, for instance, an excavation done as part of a National Historic Preservation Act undertaking. If that excavation were to occur on private property, I could see there being some conflict there where the artifacts were excavated under a federal mandate, but were from private property, and this bill would clear that issue up. It would say, okay, everything from this excavation is the property of the landowner. But as of right now, your typical arrowhead or artifact that's picked up on private lands, private surface estate, is property of the landowner. I think this is just clarifying some of these unique circumstances of split estate properties.
Thank you. Further questions for Mr. Pelton? All right. Well, again, my apologies for bringing you alongside the side of the road to testify to our committee today. But we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Madam Chair, it's quite all right.
Safe travels.
Thank you.
Do we have, Carla, do we have another person from a state agency who is wanting to testify to this bill? If not, I will move to John Ed Anderson. But first, I want to make sure we don't have somebody else from another branch of the executive office that would like to testify.
Madam Chairman, I think Aaron Campbell is with is it the Wyoming Geological Survey?
Okay.
I'm not sure, but should I bring her in?
Sure, bring her in now, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Ms. Campbell. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Erin Campbell. I'm the Wyoming State Geologist and Director of the Wyoming State Geological Survey. And I wanted to be present in case you had any questions regarding fossils. We are the repository for state fossils. And so I examined the intersection between private surface owners and state mineral rights and determined that there are only 1% of state lands that have state mineral rights and private surface rights. So we do not think that this would have a big effect on state fossils.
Very good. Questions for Ms. Campbell, committee? Yes, Representative Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Ms. Campbell, could you repeat that again, please? I'm sorry, as far as the percentages of the estate wake up.
Yes, in terms of state mineral rights, the area of land within the state that have state mineral rights and private surface rights are only 1% of the state.
Great, thank you. All right, Ms. Campbell, we appreciate you taking the time to testify today. Thank you. And Carla, if you would please bring in John Ed Anderson.
Here he comes, Madam Chairman.
He's in Bighorn County. That's why he's taking so long to get here. Just want you to know. Mr. Anderson, if you can hear me, you need to turn on your, there you go.
We're getting there.
All right. Welcome to TRW, Mr. Anderson. The floor is yours.
Madam Chair and committee members, I had Senator Cost sponsor this bill. We go back to the 1930s with Barnum Brown making some discoveries in the shale area. And at that time, they had some questions on who owned the fossils. And my understanding was those fossils in the 30s sat on a flat car at the Grable Rail Yard for several months while they tried to figure that out. So as time goes by, my family purchased a ranch about 1957. The mineral rights were severed. 75% of the mineral rights were severed off that land, and leaving the family with 25%. And about 1999, I discovered some fossils, which we expanded on and got some diggers in there that worked the hill and extracted some valuable fossils. The previous landowner from 1957 come back and he said, "Those are mine. I have the mineral rights." And he took it in front of his attorney, and his attorney advised him in Wyoming that that isn't the case, and he gave up. And somewhere in those years of about 2000, my parents both passed away and left an elaborate estate plan. And we got in trouble with some of the family members over the same issue. And they first tried to tie that to the mineral estate, the 25% we had left. And where some of the other families was going to get the land, that become problematic. So we ended up in court with this case and trying to determine whether they was minerals or fossils. And we ultimately won that case in the district court here in Basin. But amongst all this, even before this case, I had talked to Senator Cost about sponsoring a bill to try to firm this up a little bit so that we knew exactly who owned those fossils. And you know, at first we used fossilized remains in the bill, but there are things like woolly mammoths that aren't completely fossilized. So we changed the wording a little there. And artifacts, we go back to the question that I heard a little bit ago. If you find an arrowhead, we're talking about private land. And I think that has always been the case, that it belongs to you if it's there. So artifacts is probably good to leave in there. Also, I do have some feelings for the tribe. I'm a enrolled member of the Northern Cheyenne tribe in Montana, and I know the importance of that stuff, and we should be preserving it. But this is strictly a bill for fossils and ancient artifacts and the like. So the basis of our bill was to try to determine the difference between mineral rights and surface rights with fossils on them. Gravel is one that's been in front of the Supreme Court lots of times because the argument is limestone is a valuable mineral that can be mined and it's part of gravel. Well, the Supreme Court has always brought that back to the surface. And dinosaur bones especially are similar. They're made up of various minerals. And Dr. Sundell had, from the Tate Museum, the curator of the Tate Museum in Casper, had testified in our trial that fossils aren't something that you actually mine like gold and oil, and you know that their existence is close by because of various things. That fossils are something you walk the surface of the earth till you find pieces on the surface, and then you may have to dig in to get the remainder of it out. So I guess the basis of this bill is, this has been going on a lot of years, since like 1930, on who owns these. Montana has got a similar bill that they've enacted, and it's been tested in court. So I would appreciate your support on this bill, and I would take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Committee questions for Mr. Anderson. Representative Sweeney. Can you take your mask off? Just so we can hear you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for the testimony. So how similar is this bill to the Montana bill? Is it very similar?
Mr. Anderson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, very similar bill. I think Senator Cost used that bill to draft this one, so he's aware of what is in that bill. So,
thank you. Committee, further questions for Mr. Anderson? Oh, one more follow-up, or Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And so to that end, I'm not sure, there's a large, at least I know of one large reservation in Montana. There's probably others, but so perhaps these issues were already tested on the tribal concerns in Montana. Are you aware of any conversations like that?
Mr. Anderson?
yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. No, I'm not aware of any of that's been tested, so.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, Mr. Anderson, John Ed, thank you so much for being in front of the committee today, and I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Brett Moline, I see you have your hand raised with Farm Bureau Federation. Would you like to testify?
Here he comes, Madam Chairman.
Mr. Moline.
Madam Chairman, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. I'm sitting in support of this bill. I think sometimes this is why we have to keep meeting year after year, is to clarify things like this. So I think this is a strengthening of the private property rights for the surface owner. I do appreciate the concerns that Representative Clifford brought forward. So if this bill would need to be amended to alleviate those concerns, Farm Bureau would sit firmly in favor of that. With that, Madam Chair, I would sit for any questions the committee may have for me.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Moline? Seeing none, thank you. Appreciate your time. And I see, I can't read that. Is it Kristen Gunther?
Yes,
Please.
Madam Chairman.
I see her hand is raised. If you would bring her in, please.
Here she comes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. I can be very brief in my comments. My name is Kristen Gunther from the Wyoming Outdoor Council. I just wanted to just share quickly, we read this bill just looking for any federal or state lands implications. And along the way, the artifacts language also caught our attention. And I just want to say we absolutely recognize the importance of resolving this issue, especially in regards to fossils. But just want to underscore that we also understand the concerns raised by Representative Clifford and would encourage committee discussion about possible amendments to address some of the issues and objects that were raised by Representative Clifford and Mr. Pelton related to specific objects of cultural patrimony, sacred objects, et cetera, just to ensure that those particular kinds of objects don't fall unintentionally through the cracks, as Representative Clifford said. So just wanted to support raising those tribal concerns and ensuring that the tribal perspective is considered in the discussion. And with that, I will sit for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Gunther? Seeing none, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Do we have another hand raised? Pat Joyce, okay, would you please bring her in?
Here she comes, Madam Chairman.
Welcome, Ms. Joyce.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We appreciate your time today in listening and having a hearing on this bill. I am Pat Joyce, the Assistant Director of the Wyoming Mining Association. We have supported this bill and we will continue to support this bill. We have had representatives from each of our mineral industries, from trona, bentonite, coal, and uranium, review this bill. As you can imagine, in the mining industry, and we're an extractive industry, we dig below the surface, and we do from time to time come across fossils and artifacts. And I think it's been explained previously by your other people testifying today that what the concerns over the split estate has been something that our mines have experienced as well. It's not unusual for some of our mines to have to find 50 to 100 landowners, or not landowners, but people who are listed in an inheritance when they do find a fossil or something of importance like this, to determine the ownership and what they want to do with that particular artifact or fossil. So this bill, we feel, clarifies this. It would save the mines who are trying to execute their mine plans and excavate every day, time and money. As you can imagine, when we run into something like this, everything stops until the correct people are notified. And that can take weeks, it can take months. And to a mine, that's money. And that's, puts your staff on hold. It messes up your mine plan that you have with the Department of Environmental Quality. And so we would appreciate the favorable passage of this bill, because we feel that it clarifies for us part of our doing our business. I do understand what Representative Clifford is talking about, and we would certainly pay respect to that as well, and would be willing to work with them on any language. Please do get a hold of us if there's anything we can do to add to the benefit of that. So I'll be brief today because I know you have other people here. So just wanted to stand in support of the bill, and I would stand for any questions.
Questions for Wyoming Mining Association Committee? Thank you, Ms. Joyce. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Is anybody in the room interested in testifying? Okay, then public testimony is closed. And committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Sweeney, seconded by Hunt. And let's walk through the bill. Beginning on page 1. Any amendment suggestions there? Page 2. And page 3. Committee discussion. Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So my only concern would be, and that could be done as an amendment on the floor, as far as if the tribes were to come up with any amendments, we could do it at that time. Is that correct, Madam Chairman?
We can. I think presently, on private property, no matter whether it's, fossilized remains or an artifact. I mean, that as we understand it, that would be the ownership of the landowner. We're trying to clarify this because of the lawsuit that ensued. So I don't think that would change anything in terms of ownership, whether or not we amend anything out of the bill related to artifacts or not. It's private land that we're trying to address at this point. I think the concern of the tribes is definitely answered in 74106 when and they are definitely protected on state and federal lands. But I would welcome the committee. Does anybody else have any thoughts on this? Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just did look up 7-4-106 and read through it. And there is obviously provision for any human remains, the bones or burial site. Now, with that, maybe it isn't fully declared or justified if there's anything else in those burial sites besides human remains. But that would have to be something that they would have to bring forward on the floor. And then the other thing we need to be very careful of is obviously we don't want to come down and tell landowners what they can and cannot do on their property too far, because that's definitely a breach of our position. But there is definitely protection for burial sites in that 7-4-106. So I believe there is protection in statute. And if the tribes feel like there needs to be more, then that's something they could address on the floor.
Okay, further discussion? Representative Hunt?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just very briefly on the bill itself, I certainly support it, but I just wanted to throw this out there. This is, it's not very often discussed, but when it pertains to fossils, we always talk about what a epicenter we are for the energy industry and the resources we have in coal and oil and so forth. We have resources in fossils, and that might sound odd, but as they are a finite resource. They are a commodity. And I was visiting with Representative Knapp about this right before the meeting started, there is an industry out there that's somewhat hidden, it's somewhat of a niche, but fossils are an industry. They are a commodity. And there are folks out there who have money who go out and they buy property for the sole purpose of harvesting fossils off of them. And it's in my neck of the woods, we have we're in committee, I can say this. We have the Zerps Ranch, which is down in Niobrara County, has become somewhat of a world famous location for fossils. And also my family, our ranch, our neighbor, we don't have much in the way of fossils other than seashells, but our neighbor across the highway has a huge hotbed of fossils. And so I don't mean to belabor this, but I just wanted to throw that out there, that in having a discussion with him one time a few years ago, at the time before we were going completely broke, they had uncovered a Tyrannosaurus Rex on his property that was in very good condition, one of the better ones ever found in the world. And he was wanting to have a discussion about whether or not the university would be interested in purchasing it. And that didn't go through. But anyway, I just wanted to, I'm happy to see this bill. And I don't know that in the time that I've been in the body, we've ever really had a discussion on this subject, but it's not just an issue of property rights and so on and so forth. This, I think, is something that is somewhat unique to Wyoming, because our state is it is one of the hotspots of the world for fossils and paleontological research. So anyway, just thought I'd say that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Representative Hunt, for the history lesson. That was very good. All right, well, I think we are done. So Barb, if you would please call the roll.
Representative Banks. Aye. Representative Haroldson.
Aye.
Representative Hunt.
Aye.
Representative Jennings. Aye. Representative Knapp.
Aye.
Vice Chair Newsom.
Aye.
Representative Sweeney. Aye. Representative Winter.
Aye.
Chairwoman Flitner.
Aye.
9-0.
Thank you, Barb. And Senator Cost, thank you. I know you have another bill to go work. Yes, we thank you for your time. Hopefully we didn't make you late. All right, thank you. And thanks to everyone who testified to this bill. Thank you, Representative Clifford. All right, moving on, committee. Let's move on to House Bill 220. Representative Wharf, come on down. Join us. And committee, you will, if you probably read through this and likely you're thinking deja vu, this all seems quite like I've read this before. Well, and you have in fact. So we're giving Representative Wharf another chance to present his bill since in our virtual session or our first committee meeting rather, he wasn't able to join us. So the floor is yours, sir.
Yes, Madam Chair, Madam Chairman, Bob Wharf, and I do apologize to this committee. That was a mistake I made, a rookie error. I knew we'd gotten the bill through as a committee bill, and I hadn't even thought about the fact that since we had new committee assignments, that it would have to go back through the committee again. And I hate to admit it, I was actually off elk hunting when you guys were hearing my bill. So I do apologize for that, but I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and talk to you about it's now House Bill 220. It's a wild game rendering inedible portion. And, it's really a simple bill. What we're trying to do is, I had a constituent of mine that has a business in Evanston that is primarily processing game animals, primarily through hunting season. And one of the things he was looking at, they know, and I believe they have some businesses in Utah that are also doing game processing. And they were looking at ways that they could expand their business to where instead of it being a seasonal job, that it could be more of a year-round job. And so that's what really started this discussion, started us down this path. And one of the things, Madam Chair, it's like I said, it's real simple. It creates a regulatory process where we can actually do disposition, acquisition of specified portions of wild bison, big game animals, does the definitions, grants rulemaking authority and whatnot. The biggest part is if you look on page 2, subsection B, it says a person may sell, barter, dispose of for pecuniary consideration or advantage or obtained by sell or barter any inedible portion of a big game animal or wild bison lawfully taken. I think this is important. It's lawfully taken by a licensed hunter consistent with the requirements of this act and subject to any other applicable state or federal statutes, regulations under this subsection. Inedible portion means all remaining parts of a big game animal or wild bison as further defined by rule of the commission. And I know one of the concerns that has been out there is the concern that it spreads CWD. One of the things that it's important for the committee to understand is we're not looking to change the current laws and current practices that are under rules and regulations. It already tells this body how animals that have been rendered through a game processing facility are to treat those portions that are at risk for CWD transmission. That's primarily the head and the spinal cord. What we're really trying to get at is the end of the day, once they've peeled all the meat stuff off the bones, off the salvageable meat that we're going to consume for human consumption, there are portions of that are left over that we believe could be used in a process that would allow rendering to occur primarily for pet food. But this wouldn't involve changing any of the current rules, regulations, all this stuff that is through rules and regulations to be put in a specified landfill that contains the CWD virus. Those things are still going to be processed. And I think there's been maybe some misunderstandings, misperceptions. We're not talking about being able to grind up the head, the backbone. We have no desire to spread CWD any more than anybody else. But we believe that there are beneficial uses. Like I said, you got the leg bones. Once the meat's been pulled off of the leg bones, there's still some meat. I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever processed your own game. It's not, sometimes you can get it pretty clean, But there's generally going to be portions of meat attached to those bones. And that's really what we're talking about. And I don't know, Madam Chair, I do know, if you'll permit it, I know that Dr. Kimball is one of the guys that's involved with the meat processing place in Evanston, if I mention Evanston. And I know he's kind of on a time constraint. And if it's permissible, I would like to, Madam Chair, maybe let Dr. Kimball and maybe Ben Kemp provide some testimony, and I can come back and kind of close things out with the committee, answer any questions unless you want to ask me some questions right now.
Okay, committee questions for Representative Worf. And Carla, if you could please bring Dr. Kimball and Mr. Kemp into the room. And then I see we have Chief King with us, or Deputy. Yes, would you like to come up as well? Come on up right now if you want. Thank you. It's nice to see you in person. Is it nice to be out of your box, your virtual box? And while we're waiting for them to join us, Chief King, if you would please, if you have any comments, we welcome them at this time as well. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm Rick King, Chief Game Warden and Chief of the Wildlife Division. And like I said, it's very good to see all of you in person. It's good to be down here. So as it was mentioned, this bill came before the committee back in January, and we talked extensively then about the concerns that we have primarily regarding chronic wasting disease. And I'll be brief. Our concern again is that we want to ensure that the regulations that we already have in place to prevent the spread of chronic wasting disease are followed. And as I mentioned in January, the way this bill is written, that is in place. That key portion of this bill, I think, is that all applicable state and federal rules and regulations need to be adhered to. And again, the primary concern there is ensuring that we do not have any additional or inadvertent spread of chronic wasting disease across the state due to the significant impacts that it is already having and may continue to have into the future. So with that, I'll stand for any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Committee questions for Chief King? Representative Sweeney?
So thank you, Chief. So I listened into that testimony in January, and I think it was earlier than that, but I can't remember. So as the bill is structured, then with them following the rules, then you feel that the state and the department is covered.
Chief King.
Madam Chair, Representative Sweeney, again, yes, there's the portion of the bill on the second page there, page 2, line 11 and 12, to me is really important. That says that any sale or barter of inedible portions is subject to any other applicable state or federal statutes or regulations. And under current regulations, the head and the spinal column of deer, elk, and moose are required to end up in a landfill or an incinerator. And that's key for us to continue to do what we've tried to do in conjunction with other states in preventing the spread of chronic wasting disease.
Thank you.
Committee, yes, Representative Knapp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would the term lawfully taken by a licensed hunter, how would the proposed roadkill bill influence that at all?
Chief King.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Knapp, that's a good question. And so my interpretation of this is that it would have to be lawfully taken by a licensed hunter. And so that the roadkill bill, if that were to move forward, roadkill parts would not be a part of this.
Committee, further questions? Vice Chairman Newsom.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. What is the penalty for not complying? I noticed there's no penalty in this particular bill, but I'm assuming by rules and regs, you have penalties for not complying with the proper disposal.
Chief King.
Madam Chair, Representative Newsom. So it would be considered a low misdemeanor. And off the top of my head, I can't remember what the bond schedule is, but it would be punishable by a fine of up to $1,000 and up to 6 months in jail. But I think the bond schedule amount is somewhere in the neighborhood of $400.
Further questions, committee? Representative Winter.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Director King, based on the information that or concerns that we've had about this bill from your department, I guess, or people affiliated with your department, is it fair to say that we don't know enough about the CWD disease to really be confident in anything that this bill might address?
Chief King.
Madam Chair, Representative Winter, I'm sorry. I think that, so a couple of points. One, there are a lot of unknowns with chronic wasting disease. We know some about the disease, but these are prion diseases like we talked back in January, and the transmission is still, there's a lot of uncertainties with chronic wasting disease. And so our approach has been, we know that prions can exist in the environment for a long time. We know that the rendering process doesn't kill the prion. It can still continue to remain infectious. And we know that the disease is slowly but steadily spreading across the state. We have one last holdout in the western side of the state where chronic wasting disease hasn't been detected yet, but we know it's been spreading across the state. And so to answer your question, I think essentially is what I would tell you is that there's a lot of uncertainties with CWD, and I think it is in the state's best interest to ensure that we have based on our best knowledge that we have today, that we take precautions to ensure that we do not do anything to enhance the spread of chronic wasting disease.
Representative Knapp.
Thank you, Mr. King. Testing right now for CWD is voluntary, is it not? And so does that cause a concern in this aspect?
Chief King.
Madam Chair, Representative Knapp, that's correct. Currently, we are not requiring testing of hunter harvested animals for chronic wasting disease. We do have the ability to require it in commission regulations, and we have considered in some areas where we're not getting adequate samples, invoking that regulation on a pilot basis. That's something that we might bring forth in regulation, but currently it's not required for hunters to test their animal for chronic wasting disease. We offer it on a voluntary basis, and last year we received about 4,000 hunter harvested CWD samples. That's out of about 40,000 deer. So roughly maybe 10% of the hunter harvested deer are currently being tested on a voluntary basis.
Yes, Representative Banks.
I guess just to circle back a little bit, I like the idea and I want to support the business in Representative Worf's district with this, but I sort of was getting a little bit of conflicting messages from you. So you, to restate this lines, 11 and 12 on page 2, you think that does cover us as far as CWD? I mean, as much as we're covered on anything right now, and that, the risk is as minimal as we've made it for anything else. Is that correct?
Chief King.
Madam Chair, Representative Banks, again, I think that currently right now in regulation, we require that the spinal column, the head and spinal column of any deer, elk, and moose, it's required that end up in an incinerator or a landfill. And right now, I think that's our best defense based on what we know about chronic wasting disease. And so as long as that continues to be followed and adhered to in any venture that moves forward under this, that addresses our current concerns to the best of our knowledge.
Okay. Oh, Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I guess a real quick question in the realm of wild bison. Obviously, there's a small handful of those tags that go out. What about the domestic side of bison? I know there's a lot of hunt programs for those, but we have in here that it has to be a licensed hunter. Do they have to get some sort of a license on those domestic hunts? And could those portions be used as well? Because that's probably going to be one of the largest amounts of meat is coming off of those. Has that been thought about, or is that an option in this situation?
Chief King.
Madam Chair, Representative Haroldson. So the Game and Fish Department doesn't have any authority over domestic bison. And so our definition of wild bison is very specific to those bison in the northwest corner of the state where we actually regulate their harvest. So any domestic bison herds, they would certainly be available for the rendering process. And I think as we talked back in January, there's a large volume of domestic parts that can be entered into the rendering process.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Chief King. Appreciate your time.
Madam Chairman.
And so Carla, have Dr. Kimball and Mr. Kemp. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Jennings.
Madam Chairman, thank you. Chief King. So I just have one question. I'm probably going to ask this of whoever else is against this. So can you explain to me, because I can think of lots of things that happen here. Outfitters, they bring people in from out of state, they send the animal back. You don't have any control over whether they properly dispose of the head or spinal column. And people hunt from one area of the state to another area of the state. They pick that animal up, they take it home, they throw it to their animals. They're hunting with someone else. They say, hey, can I have yours too? And that goes on all the time. Can you explain to me how this would be more potentially dangerous than what's going on across the state now?
Chief King.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Jennings, and again, as I've mentioned, that as long as our current regulations about the transport of deer, elk, and moose carcasses are followed, we're in good shape with preventing the spread of CWD to the best of our knowledge. And so those regulations require that the brain and spinal column end up in a landfill or an incinerator. And those regulations actually they pertain to the transport around the state. And so the way the regulation reads, it says that a person can either leave those parts at the site of the kill, or if they're going to transport them, they can do so. They can take them home, they can take them to a processor, they can take them to a taxidermist. But ultimately, it's their responsibility to ensure that those parts that we're most concerned about end up in a landfill. Did I not answer your question,
Madam Chairman?
Follow up.
Yeah, but surely, Chief King, there's a lot of people that take those parts and they render them down and feed them to their animals. Surely surely you guys recognize that's a common occurrence.
Representative Jennings, are you saying that hunters in Wyoming that you are aware of are taking the spinal cord and the brain of their deer and elk and giving those to their dogs?
Madam Chairman, I'm not telling you that I've witnessed any of that, but I can't imagine that people that are that are taking their animals home, they have dogs or animals. I can't imagine that's not happening. And I was just asking Chief King if do you not concur, Chief King, that is occurring?
Chief King.
Madam Chair, Representative Jennings, I think again, do some of our wildlife violations or regulations get ignored? Absolutely, that's what keeps our game wardens in business. But what I'm saying is, I think that in this process, if a business isn't going to undertake this process, if they adhere to these transport guidelines that we have in place, then we're in good shape.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Chief King. All right. because they are in short of time, then Dr. Kimball and Mr. Kemp, if you are there, please turn on your cameras and your microphones at this time. We appreciate your time. Thank you. Dr. Kimball, welcome.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Ted Kimball, I'm an intensive care doctor at the University of Utah, but also have a lot of time spent in Wyoming. I help run the ICUs through tele-ICU at Evanston, at Rock Springs, in Jackson, and we also are involved in our families are involved in both outfitting and meat processing in Evanston. And so really appreciate the opportunity to join you and your respectful colleagues today. Also really are grateful for Chief King being there today. And I would like to just start by reiterating our wholehearted support for the statements that Chief King has made regarding CWD, regarding the efforts of the Fish and Game to regulate the transport of animals. All of those things are decisions and regulations that have been put in place over time that have made sense and are connected with the prevention of the spread of this disease at the level that they're able to do so. All of us know that Fish and Game regulations can't fix everybody's attitude and everybody's choices, but for what we know about prions, and I have an extensive infectious disease background as well, I would not disagree with one thing that Chief King has said. I would support what he has said regarding that, and that this effort in order to use this rendered portion of the animals that's currently joining the spinal cord and the head in landfills is and has to be in alignment with the current regulations. So that's why those lines 11 and 12 are so important. I would just walk you through, all of you representatives and Madam Speaker, if I can, the process that Representative Jennings is referring to. So your average hunter goes out and often is successful in the state of Wyoming. They will field dress the animal. That means leaving the entrails typically in the field, and then they'll bring that animal home. A number of people, as Representative Jennings has mentioned, do their own processing in their own garage, and they just take that animal and they take the meat that their family will consume. And in a year like this is meat that is very important to a lot of families. And they may throw things in a garbage can that are left over. They may throw them out on the back 40 for their dogs and other animals to consume. But we support fully the regulation that in order to help prevent the spread of CWD, those parts that Chief King has mentioned, the head and the spinal cord, by law should be put in a garbage can and end up in a landfill. Having said that, a lot of people do bring their animals to meat processors, and Frotten's Meat Processing, represented by Mr. Kemp in Evanston, is one of those that processes somewhere between 700 and 800 animals a year, supporting the local economy. And in that process, aside from the spinal cord and head, which are supposed to be handled by the hunter, we occasionally get an animal that comes in with that still as part of the animal that's brought in. And we very strongly recommend and support those regulations of that part of the animal ending up in a landfill. There's another probably 15 to 20 tons just at our processing plant of perfectly good rendered product, again, that can't be resold or can't be used for human consumption, that ends up in the landfill. The landfill charges for that. And one of the downsides of the landfill is that landfill is actually a very aggressive feeding ground for wild animals, including coyotes and birds of prey. And so, though with the best intentions of that spinal cord and brain ending up in a landfill, I would hope over the future that the real way to prevent CWD is to truly incinerate all of that part of the animal, short of shutting down all hunting and taking that right away. That's got to be the next step, because the landfill is not really a solution. It gets back into the feeding chain quite regularly. all this bill really is proposing is that we hold up that regulation, even though it has some faults, as I've mentioned. It doesn't purely protect us all from CWD. But we would take the parts of that animal that we're paying 11 cents a pound to the landfill to dump, that's perfectly edible for a domestic dog or cat, and turn that into an opportunity to generate jobs and revenue in many local communities in Wyoming. At the same time, very strictly following, as Chief King has recommended, the current regulations for protecting against CWD. And in doing so, I think what we're actually doing is reducing the environmental impact of landfills by bringing tons of this non-CWD rendered product back out of the landfill, which is also a draw for those wild animals. The less of it that goes in, the less of that turns back into the wildlife cycle, and take that meat and rendered product and turn it into something that would go to a domestic animal, which is much less likely to spread it into the wildlife environment. So I'm glad to answer any questions. I would conclude by again mentioning that we are in lockstep alignment with Chief King, this bill, and we would actually volunteer, Chief King, to run any kind of pilot program you would like. In fact, we would be willing to test every single animal or every 10 or whatever we can work together to afford to get a better testing sample of the animals that come through this processing opportunity, to really track CWD and help Fish and Game with that very difficult effort, along with all the other things that they do so well in the state. This is another task that's laid upon their shoulders. And I would agree with Chief King in doing a pilot project, and we would volunteer to help him with that.
Thank you, Dr. Kimball. Appreciate it. Oh, we lost him. Oh, he's back. Committee, questions for Dr. Kimball? Thank you, sir. We appreciate your testimony. It's been very informative. Thank you.
You bet.
And Mr. Kemp, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate Dr. Kimball. I work with him closely. So there's not a lot to add there other than I'm on the processing end of things, and I actually have worked very closely with Game and Fish to help with the samples. Uintah County underwent that, not this past season, but the season before. And we are very supportive of continuing to monitor and cooperate with any CWD efforts the state has. Just to speak briefly to what Dr. Kimball referenced in terms of lots and lots of renderings, you know, as the animal comes into the meat processing facility, it will hang for anywhere from a day to several days. Some like to age their meat, like you would similarly see in aging beef. Others like to have it harvested or cut up very quickly. But regardless of that, as we take and cut off the steaks and the roasts, we have to trim off all of the exterior, what we call the rind. And that rind is not palatable. Although it's edible, it's not palatable. And so that rind is where much of this rendering product is coming from. And then, of course, whatever is left attached to the bone. We pride ourselves in trying to get as much for the hunter as possible, but there is just some left over that is not desirable. And so it has historically found itself into the landfill. And we think that we've got a product rendering that could be used to continue, that would ultimately benefit the community and those that are in the wild game rendering business. So appreciate the opportunity to visit with you, but very much in support of this bill. And I would sit for any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kemp. Committee questions? Yes, Vice Chairman Newsom.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Kemp, for being here. Are there other state or federal regulations that have to do with the rendering of pet food? Are you under any kind of regulation with domestic meat?
Mr. Kemp?
Thank you for that question, Madam Chair, Representative Newsom. Yes, in terms of the pet products that we have produced in other states, it follows the same process that would be in place here in the state of Wyoming as well.
Mr. Kemp, what other states do you have you been involved with?
So we work with the state of Utah. They've been processing these renderings for almost 20 years now. And there's provisions within their regulation that allows for these renderings to be made into dog food and or dog treats. We don't actually, we're cooking these treats down in Utah at a manufacturing location, and then they're packaged and then shipped to really all over the place. But there is also products that they're of a raw nature, and some have found benefit of that in the state of Utah.
So, Mr. Kemp, is it your intent then to build a facility in Evanston so that animals taken in the state would be processed here and packaged and delivered for sale out of Wyoming? Is that correct?
Yes, Madam Chair, that's exactly correct. We would like to establish or build on to the existing structure that we have and to start manufacturing that here in the state.
Okay. Representative Knapp?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Kemp, I would imagine it would be cost prohibitive to do mandatory testing for inedible portions.
Mr. Kemp?
Madam Chair, Representative Knapp, yeah, at a large scale, presently the testing for CWD, I don't know that it's as much a cost issue as just a timeliness issue. You know, in talking with the Game and Fish, they're definitely requesting or asking hunters to participate in a voluntary program. But from the time that the animal is harvested in the field to the time that it gets to a processing facility and then processed from there on out, you know, would lend itself to some animals being able to be tested first, but not all animals. Oftentimes we have hunters, if they're out of state in particular, you know, that may be on a time constraint and looking to try and have that processed quickly and then on through to wherever their home destination is, residents being the same as well. So it's a cost issue as well as just you know, an efficiency issue. Can we effectively and efficiently process or wait for the testing to take place and then process the animals? I think as that testing gets a little bit quicker and the response time is much faster than it presently is, I could see that definitely being something that, and I would imagine that would come through regulation, but that might be a question for Chief King.
Mr. Kim, I'm just kind of curious, trying to wrap my head around your processing facility. So if your intent is to try to employ people year round and process year round, then would you have a large freezer, walk-in freezer where you would store animals? Is that, just help me understand.
Great question, Madam Chair. So in answer to that question, we would still process the animals in the timeframes that we typically do. We like to have those animals processed within a week, if possible, no more than 10 days to 2 weeks. But the renderings is the question, and those would go into cold storage. Instead of going to the landfill, we would store them in cold storage until such time that they would be processed.
Okay, thank you. Committee, further questions for Mr. Kemp? Okay, thank you, sir. We appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carla, do we have anyone else online that wants to? I see a hand is raised, so if you could welcome that person into the meeting. I can't see. I'm old and I'm blind. Okay.
Madam Chairman, I'm bringing Ms. Gunther back in.
Okay. Ms. Gunther, welcome. Do you have some brief comments for us?
I do, Madam Chairman. I will be very brief today. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. I'm here from the Wyoming Outdoor Council, and also once again was a member and co-chair of the Chronic Wasting Disease Working Group. And I just wanted to share a couple comments. One, we absolutely support the best science-based practice of treating the head and spinal column with care. And absolutely appreciate that everyone is operating in good faith to try to prevent the spread of this disease. I think what I just wanted to share is it seems to me there's just a lot of unknowns associated with chronic wasting disease and with prions. And what we know about prions can change. It's only been, I think, in the last few years that we've realized, the extent to which prions can, for example, get taken up by plants and really persist in the environment. And so I think we want to allow that there's quite a lot of uncertainty about this disease that is important to consider. We do know that prions can last a really long time. And so the reason I bring this up is that when we're talking about, commercially distributing rendered products, for example, in pet food, we're talking about a new dispersal mechanism potentially. And so that has me concerned as well, because, if dogs are eating produced food, if there's any risk that we discover associated with that, that becomes a new dispersal mechanism that we have to worry about in the environment. I also wanted to just mention offhand that the working group actually did think that long-term, the Department of Agriculture and Department of Health, it would benefit everyone to start a conversation with wild game processors to try to address any concerns or new information around chronic wasting disease. So we certainly, I'm speaking for the Outdoor Council, appreciate the business opportunity associated with this, but I guess would just urge caution associated with some of the unknowns. And to the last testimony, would just add that as we get faster testing options, as that becomes more available, we may have more options. But it just gives me a bit of pause and some heartburn to think about creating a new dispersal mechanism when there's just so much that we don't know about this disease. And I'll finish there and stand for any questions.
Thank you. Committee questions for Ms. Gunther? Thank you. We appreciate your time. And I don't see any more hands raised, so we'll go to the room, and I see Senator Baldwin is here. Would you care to join us, sir? Welcome to TRW.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. The floor is yours, sir.
I don't want to take too long. You'll see my name is on this bill. And Ben, who you just saw in the cubicle online, processes not all my game, but a lot of my game. And we discussed this when he was processing one of my animals earlier this year. I'm a big supporter of the bill. I think it's a huge economic driver, potential to employ a lot of new people in the process, as well as employ some people right now that are just working seasonal during hunting season. I think that's an important issue. I would just throw to the side that it's a benefit to the dogs. And that is, my dogs have actually tried some of the treats that are processed through this, and they loved them. We're ready for more. I think it's a good bill. I think it's a good process. CWD had us have a lot of unknowns. It's not new. It's been around for a long time. We're still learning more about it, but I don't think this bill and this process presents a real clear and present danger. I think it's pretty straightforward. And if something came up, as was raised by the last testifier, we can put a stop to it. We can hit the brakes and stop and see what's going on. I don't think it's something that we started and it goes on forever that we can't stop it. I would be willing to bet, and this is just an off the cuff remark, is that most of the dogs who do this probably do their duty in their yards or around their homes. I think it's pretty easy to control, and I don't think it's something that would get out of hand, but I think this is an economic driver. We're always looking for those. In Evanston, which is part of my district, we're always looking for something to employ more people and drive the Wyoming economy. We all know that we need some money. Let's put some more people to work. But with that, I don't want to take a lot of your time, but I'm a big supporter of the bill, and I think it needs to move forward. And I appreciate you listening to me. And I would answer any questions, but I don't have a lot of answers today.
Thank you, Senator Baldwin. Committee questions for Senator Baldwin? Thank you. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Now we'll move to the room. Are there any representatives here that would like to speak to this? No, you're just slow day. Welcome, Representative Fortner. Come on down.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't intend on speaking here. I thought this is a good bill, but I have one question. As I testified here a while back, chronic wasting lives in the ground and it lives in water. Is the intent of this to make dog food? Is that what we're intending here? And if it is there a chance of the feces putting chronic wasting back in the ground? Because that would be a prime way to spread it from the bottom of the draws to the tops of the hills. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Fortner. That is the question, one of the questions that looms large over this bill. So thank you. All right, anybody else come on up?
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, Jesse Johnson, Wyoming Wildlife Federation. I would stand behind a lot of the comments made in regards to CWD, so I won't belabor those points and just say I support that caution that is urged. What I did want to touch on was a couple other things. Under the guidance for industry that the FDA puts out about the use of material from deer and elk and animal feed, under number 4, they say that the FDA recommends that materials from deer and elk considered at high risk for CWD no longer be entered into the animal feed system. Under present circumstances, FDA is not recommending that feed be made from deer and elk from a non-endemic area if area be recalled if a state later declares that area endemic for CWD or a CWD eradication zone. So what they're saying is they're not recommending it. They're not forbidding it, but they don't recommend it, and they don't recommend it in high risk areas. And what I can tell you is that Wyoming is a high risk area. Probably Wyoming, Colorado, Wisconsin. You know, these are the places where when we're looking at ungulates and the cervids especially, these are high risk areas. There are portions of our state that have large percentages of CWD in their populations. The other side of this that I wanted to briefly touch on, and forgive me, I'm gonna have to pull up just so I get the wording correct here, is the North American model of wildlife conservation. These are the tenets by which the US and the Canadian conservation system sort of loosely obey. And it's the idea of wildlife resources are public resource is number 1. Number 2 on that list is that markets for game are eliminated. So that's saying that commercialization and bringing wild game into a commercialized situation is something that we have visited in America before, and it went very wrong. It was the reason that we had to pull together things like the Lacey Act and the Migratory Bird Act, as well as many other things. So while I realize that's left up to the states, I know some states do this. When you pair that with the idea of entering and codifying this as an entrance into a commercialized system, so we are putting a dollar amount on wild game meat. And that there's just no way around that to say that where does that stop as far as, you know, as that goes, it is a state's decision. And then when you pair that with the fact that Wyoming is high risk and looking at everything that is CWD, it just brings concern. Now I will follow this up with it. I am a hunter who has rendered the fat off of bears to use in pastry dishes. I try and use everything. I pack the liver, the heart, everything out of the field. I do feed my dogs scraps when I get the negative test back from my animals. So it's not that I'm against this. I'm just bringing some questions, especially around how we look at wildlife as a commodified, you know, thing. They are a resource, but they are not for sale.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Johnson.
And I'm so
I'm
sorry. I have one follow-up
Okay.
thing too, is that when you look at sort of the restrictions around this, you know, when you take your animal, whether it's your hide or your head or your antlers, and you take it to a taxidermist, you have to provide proof that you took it lawfully. You have to provide a license number. They have to take it down, and they have to have that in their records for every animal that they have, so they can prove that it was rightfully and lawfully taken. So I don't see that. I don't know if we've worked that out in here, if the parameters that are set out in this bill touch that enough as far as that, but I'm concerned at least around sort of the restrictions there, and if they are detailed enough to fit that in. And I would stand for any questions.
Okay, question, Representative Haroldson, and then Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Ms. Johnson, so a couple things addressing the selling of wildlife. The the beauty is this is for those that have a license and have taken an animal. This is not an area where they can take their animal and get rid of their animal. This is just scraps. This is waste. So we're taking waste and using it. The concept sounds amazing. And I believe the concept is amazing. Obviously, the unknown is CWD. Okay. But the second thing with that is, when you take an animal to a processor, you have to present a license number. You can't take an animal to a processor without a license number. So every one of these animals, the meat coming off of these animals would be considered a lawfully taken game. And we have to realize at the end of the day, and Mr. King can say this too, we have to trust that people are going to be honest. I mean, hopefully people are being honest, but yeah. So I think that are we taking and taking wild game animals and turning them into something of profit? I guess maybe you could say that, but they're lawfully taken in a hunting process. This isn't the bison of the American West where we've got a massive trade being based off of them or something. So anyways, just some comments to that. And I believe we do need to be careful, but I believe this isn't commercializing wildlife into a money-making venture. This is taking a scrap byproduct and turning it into a way to bring some business into the state and some jobs into the state. So again, the CWD is a concern that we have to address, but on the economic side and on the wildlife side, I don't believe we're crossing any sacred boundaries in this, or at least in my opinion.
Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So on the chronic wasting disease, is Utah affected like we are? I'm not sure.
I
Ms.
would,
Johnson.
excuse me, Ms. Chairwoman and Representative Flitner, I would refer more to Rick King's expertise on that, but I would say, far as I know, Wyoming has some of the highest prevalence in the country. We are far more affected than most of the states surrounding us, I think, barring Colorado.
Thank you. Questions for the questions committee? Okay, thank you, Ms. Johnson. Appreciate your testimony. Further testimony from the room? Oh, sure. Vice Chairman Newsom has a question for Mr. Kemp. If he could join us once again, please. Carla.
Madam Chairman, I'm bringing him back in.
Thank you. Mr. Kemp, thank you for joining us once again. Vice Chairman Newsom has a question for you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Kemp,
Yes.
As we were having this other conversation, a question came to me. And do you anticipate in your business using just animals that, the inedible portions of animals that you have processed, or would you anticipate purchasing inedible portions from other hunters that have maybe processed themselves, or another processor that wants to sell you their inedible portions? What's the scope of your business plan?
Mr. Kemp?
That's a great question. Remember who I'm talking with here, but Madam Chair and Representative Newsom, I guess the sky's the limit a little bit, but I don't foresee looking at any hunter harvested, commercially processed, or when I say commercially, non-processed by a game processing facility. So we would primarily use our own renderings and then look to possibly, as growth opportunities come about, to use the renderings from other meat processors that are currently disposing of those renderings. But I don't think going directly to a hunter is part of the scope of what we're looking at.
Okay, committee, further questions? Thank you, Mr. Kemp. We appreciate you stepping back in.
You bet.
Okay, if there are no further testimony then, Representative Worf.
Madam Chair, just one thing that I wanted to add. I thought Chief King did a great job. And I have to admit, he's one of my favorite game wardens. He actually hails from my part of the state. So We groomed him for where he's at. We're very proud of him. He's represented Sportsman and the Game and Fish Department very well, but
I bet he wishes he was still back there.
and I just wanted to say that the last sentence, Chief Game Warden King didn't touch on it, but the last sentence on page 2 says that under this subsection, inedible portion means all remaining parts of the processed big game animal or wild bison as further defined by rule of the commission. So I think it's important. I wanted to touch on that the commission's not being excluded or omitted from this. They still have the ability to add more regulation if they have, but you've heard from testimony from Dr. Kimball and Mr. Kemp. Their intent is to abide by the current rules and regulations that are in process, in place for how we process CWD or animals that have been harvested. That is something that still is in play, but I wanted to point out that the commission still has the ability to further define things. If it was brought up, there may be new information that comes along. If we find out that there's other areas in an animal that it may be problematic. Right now, we know that's primarily in the spinal cord and in the brain. If we find out, as science progresses, that it's elsewhere in the body, the commission can always pull this back, and they can always come back and say, well, based on new science, this is now something that we need to further regulate. Or they may be able to say, well, we've found a way to manage CWD, and they can lift that. But I think that was something that I just wanted to point out to the committee, that in addition to following the state rules and regulations, that the commission still has the ability to further define if that's warranted. So just wanted to make you aware of that, Madam Chair.
So Representative Wharf, do you have a theory, or do you know if the Game and Fish does, and Chief King can probably answer this as well, but I'll ask you first on why CWD has spread so rapidly across the state?
That's hard, Madam Chair. I mean, there's a lot of unknowns, and the reality is part of it is sampling. As we sample more, we learn more, and we may find that CWD's always been kind of on the landscapes to some level. It's clearly something that was identified. I mean, it was first found right here in Wyoming, Colorado, but it's throughout. I mean, there's a lot of the eastern states that have CWD, and I'm not sure how anybody's ever answered how they got it. My understanding was that it was, first discovered here in a lab where we had captive animals that were held for research. That's where it was, and it was actually Dr. Beth Williams, who was from Wyoming, that was the doctor that found and kind of came up with CWD. So it has all its roots and foundation here in the state, and it has spread largely. Initially, the way Wyoming handled it, different states have handled it different. Some states have had scorched earth where they kill everything. That hasn't seemed to affect it. Wyoming kind of was just letting it go, trying to manage it, and it continued to spread. Now the question is, did it spread, or is it just more a factor that as you test more, unlike us, when we're sick, we go to the doctor. And so we can look at medical doctors and they can tell us whether you got a new disease or whether you got something spreading. Like we all know COVID something, there's other forms of COVID. Wildlife don't go to doctors, so we can't go to the doctor and say, is this something new? But as we learn about wildlife diseases, we start looking for it. And as you look more, it's only reasonable to think that you're probably likely to find more of it.
So I know you lived in Utah. Does the state of Utah not test like we do here in Wyoming?
Madam Chair, they have not, because it hasn't been prevalent in their state. I would imagine that they've had, and Ben might be able to answer this better than I, but I know that they've probably had a couple rare instances of CWD, but it's very rare. I mean, I know he sent me a text as far as the rendering and the stuff they've done. It's very few animals have tested positive for CWD in Utah. Now, if you go to Colorado, there's more prevalence in Colorado than there is in Utah. So it may be more, and I don't know if Chief Game Warden King knows more about Colorado or Utah, but I would say it's a new disease. And even though it's been around, like Senator Baldwin said, it's been around a long time. It is a new disease in the fact that we're just really looking into it and learning more about it. But I know there's several people. I know I was at the CWD meetings, and I know we had a county commissioner from Converse County that said every one of the deer that he killed was that he and his family had killed. They all appeared healthy. If you would have looked at them, they didn't have any evidence that they were withering away like they do in the later stages of the disease. And he said they had consumed every one of the animals. By the time they got back the results, he said everything was positive, but they had consumed them all. And so, it's one of those things that, it's scary. And believe me, I think anybody that had an animal that looked sickly would probably know better than to eat it. But it appears to me that if they appear like they're healthy animals, even if they've been exposed to CWD, it's not been transmitted to them. And that's probably my biggest concern is as we talk about CWD, I'm worried about scaring people away from hunting. As you know, I'm an advocate of hunting. I mean, it's been a big part of my life. And last thing I want is people to think that we shouldn't be buying licenses that fund our game and fish agency and put food on our tables for fear that you might be bringing home something to your family. But
Okay, thank you, Representative Worf.
thank you,
Representative
Madam
Hunt.
Chair.
Madam Chairman, thank you. I think I understood what you said, but I guess to the point of Utah, if they're not testing for it, then how do they know whether or not it's prevalent?
Representative.
I
Worf.
mean, how can they tell what the prevalence rate is?
Yeah, and Madam Chair, they're not testing at the level we are, I should say, and I'm sure that they're doing some testing. I think all the states are doing some testing because it is a concern. It is something new that's on the wildlife scene. Even though it's been there for years, we're starting to find that it is in places. Like I said, I don't know. I've never had anybody explain to me how it got east of the Rocky Mountains. Because as far as I know, the place it was discovered was a place that everybody supposed that it originated. The fact that it's in eastern states, I don't know how you explain that. So there may be an explanation. I don't know if Chief Game Warden King knows that, or maybe Jess, I don't know. But that's something that to me, they are testing it, and I can look, I believe, Madam Chair, if you give me a minute, I'm sure that I still saved the text from Ben where he said, he said, Wyoming testing is more comprehensive. Therefore, the data shows more CWD samples. For example, in 2019, 3,688 samples were taken from hunter-killed deer, elk, and moose across the state. There was 370 positive tests. The actual number of samples taken, though, was 5,694 samples, but that included roadkill, winter kill, et cetera. Of the 370 positive, there's 263 that was mule deer, 67 were whitetail, 40 were elk, there was no moose. And he says the majority of positive samples came from the eastern side of Wyoming. So I'm mistaken. I thought he said Utah. So Utah may not have any positives. And like I said, Ben could probably tell you that.
Okay. Committee, further questions for Representative Worf? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh, Representative Banks.
I guess more just a statement. I love the idea of using these inedible portions and the manufacturing and creating the jobs. I'm sort of conflicted because the Game and Fish obviously has reassured us, but I also have an email from the Game Wardens Association that's opposed. And so I don't know, I'm just more of a statement that there's no real great answer for me.
Separate organization, as you know.
Right.
Well,
Okay.
Madam Chair, if I can answer that.
Representative Worf.
I believe the question is, when I read their comments, I believe it's because they are assuming that we're talking about trying to render the head and the spinal cord. And that is not, it's currently against the law to use that. It by the current rules and regulations that this bill would say we follow, that has to go to a certified landfill or it has to be incinerated. So this bill doesn't change any of that existing language. And I think that's the miscommunication or misperception I think was out there. This bill is not trying to say, let us use the entire inedible portions, which I think has been the confusing part of this. What we're talking about is after the animal's been processed, the inedible portions that we can no longer use. That's the rind that he talked about. That's the legs, any meat that's attached to that. does not include the head or the spinal cord. We're assuming that that's already going to the landfill because that's what the rules and regulations require. So hopefully that answers your question. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll let you do your business.
Thank you, Representative Wharf. Just one last question, and maybe for Chief King, is inedible portions, is that defined in statute, or is it necessary that we help to define that? Clarification purposes, Chief King.
Yeah, Madam Chair, members of the committee. So currently edible portions of big game animal is defined in statute, but inedible is not.
Okay, and does the committee have any further questions from Chief King? Lastly, it seems odd to me that Wyoming has such a high rate of CWD and the surrounding states do not. And again, is it because we're so cautious and our testing rates are so much better here? Do you have any comments or theory as to why that is?
Yeah, Madam Chair, our testing's been in place for quite a while. We've known about CWD in the state for around 40 years. We've done extensive testing. Initially, probably 20 plus years ago, nationally, CWD got a lot of attention and there was some federal money available, and some states took advantage of that to ramp up testing. And certainly in Wyoming, about that time, we underwent a process to extensively sample across the state, voluntary samples. And during that time frame, we collected enough samples to say with some certainty whether the disease was present in an area or not. We couldn't give, we didn't collect enough samples to say with certainty what percentage of the critters on the landscape were positive. We could just say whether it was there or not. And so from that testing, we know that CWD has been spreading across the state. More recently, we've changed our sampling protocol to trying to detect prevalence so that we can get an adequate sample to say what percentage of those critters on the landscape are indeed positive. Other states, I think, are behind us a little bit in that they are more in the mode of just presence absence testing. So Montana for a long time felt like they didn't have it until they found it. And once they've found it, they've increased their sample size. Utah is a positive state. They have had animals test positive, and they too are following in our approach in that they've gone from more of a presence absence sampling scheme to more of a trying to determine prevalence on the landscape.
And Chief King, is there a theory as to why it has spread? Is it our climate conditions, or I don't know, is there any kind of a theory?
Yeah, Madam Chair, it's a good question, and I really can't definitively tell you how it spread across the landscape. We have learned that the CWD prions can be taken up in the soil. They can be taken up in plant matter. That's a possible route of transmission, that through the feces and urine of a critter that's positive, those prions can end up on the landscape. They can end up on the landscape through bones of a carcass, for example. So what I can tell you though is that across the country, there has been a very strong indication, and I think it's safe to say this with certainty, that in other states, big game animals are not regulated like in Wyoming, and private ownership is possible. And there's a lot of game farms, game ranches across the country. And there's definitely been a link in the transmission of CWD amongst game farms. So game farm A may not know that they have animals that are CWD positive. They sell them to another game farm in another state. And that link is very well defined, that transmission route has occurred.
And Chief King, has the prion ever been found in carnivores?
Madam Chair, so right now the disease, chronic wasting disease, it's not known to be to have spread to a carnivore. We do know that the prion can pass through their digestive tract and still remain infectious to an ungulate, but that species jump has not occurred. But prion diseases there are multiple prion diseases. So for example, scrapie in sheep is a prion disease, and in mink, there is also a similar disease. And that disease, interestingly, mink farms had a process where they took the pelt, ground up the carcasses, and then fed them back to mink. And it's been determined that that was a transmission route that led to a mink encephalopathy disease, which is a prion disease.
Yuck. Thank you. Representative Knapp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This bill is, I've gone back and forth in my own mind, and I'm going to ramble through my thoughts, and maybe it'll come up with a question for you. But I think one of the industries that I want to protect is hunting and sportsman industry. You know, one of the huge industries in Wyoming, and I think this CWD, although it's new and unknown, causes a great risk to that industry. And as mentioned before, I think this would be one way that it would create a mechanism for spreading that disease. I don't want to regulate the industry any more than it is, but the safeguards that we have in here truly aren't safeguards at all through regulation, because testing is voluntary. And so every rendering that could come from this potentially could be an animal that had it. We just don't know. So to me, that safeguard doesn't exist. And also the incineration versus landfills. One of the questions I have is, where do you see the future going with this? Because if we were to truly safeguard ourselves or prevent this, we would go to incineration only versus landfills. And I hate to say it, but mandatory testing versus voluntary, which, I mean, at this point, I don't think anybody would agree with doing. But where do you see the future going with this?
Chief King.
Madam Chair, Representative Knapp, that's a great question. So currently the state has a chronic wasting disease management plan in place, and that plan touches on a lot of what you've brought up, in that we have great concern for the future health of our big game animals. There's a lot that can be tried on an experimental basis, I think. So to touch on a couple of things, I think that in an ideal world, carcasses would be incinerated, but that's expensive. So the next best option is a landfill. The next best option along those lines is to ensure that landfills are regularly covering carcasses so that they're not exposed to critters that could potentially spread them. I think that the Game and Fish Department is going to continue to use the best available science to put into place management practices that may help prevent the spread and prevalence of chronic wasting disease. But as I've mentioned, there's a lot of uncertainties. One thing that you mentioned is that currently, right now, testing is voluntary. I think that we are going to bring forth a potential proposal to implement a pilot program to require testing in certain areas where we haven't gotten a very good response, and we would like to have better samples. So I think that's something that we may entertain. I think, is there anything else in there that I didn't touch on?
I think we're good. And you know, it just dawned on me, Chief King. I'm looking at this clock. It says 1:05. I'm thinking we got all the time in the world, and it's an hour off. So thank you. I appreciate your time. So
Thank you. Thanks.
all right. Committee, what's your pleasure? We haven't moved the bill yet. Committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Haroldson, seconded by Jennings. Let's work the bill. Page 1. Is there any amendments? Page 2. Page 3. Vice Chairman Newsom.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would like to sunset this, and so that a future legislature can revisit it, and we can, because there seems to be so much uncertainty, as to chronic wasting and that I would like to sunset it in 5 years.
Okay. Second? I'll second it. Okay, all those in favor of a sunset, vote by a raising of your hands. And I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And opposed, same sign. 6-2, so the amendment carries to sunset it in 5 years. All right, so further, I think for the sake of time, we'll just go to a roll call vote.
Representative Banks. Representative Haroldson.
Yes. Aye.
Representative Hunt. Representative Jennings. Representative Knapp.
No.
Vice Chair Newsom. Representative Sweeney, no. Representative Winter.
No.
Chairwoman Flitner.
I feel like John Kerry, I'm a flip flopper. This is the third time I've flipped on this bill. But it does not pass. 5-4 is my count.
I agree. Do pass. Motion fails.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I apologize on the time. Thank you, Representative Worf.